So here we are, and things are unfolding. And one of the things I've noticed this week, Lisa, is that people are no more or less certain than they were at the beginning in many ways, and that is generating a lot of emotional responses for people. And I've noticed also that there is a lot of talk about anxiety and calm and resilience and well-being. And this whole narrative is evolving about how we should be managing anxiety in our businesses and helping all employees not to be anxious. And I thought it would be a really good topic for us to talk about because in our business, I think we get quite familiar with dealing with emotional states and how they affect people in business because they affect the brain. So I know we think of emotions as at one level as chemical responses in the brain that it enable you to be ready for the challenges of the environment or situation that you find yourself in. And at times of great uncertainty, the part of the brain that deals with that is firing little alarm signals, and that's why we feel different. And I think many people confuse that, which is kind of what we mean by anxiety, with when you're worrying about things, which is more of a cognitive thing. When you're worrying about, oh, I wonder if I'll be made redundant because it's bound to happen, or I wonder if my team is dealing with things all right, or if maybe I should be, checking in with them more often. So I thought that would be a useful thing for us to discuss today.
Yeah, I agree, because I think that like you've had so many conversations over the last number of weeks about people experiencing, well, they don't know whether it's anxiety or whether they're, someone said to me the other day, I feel like I'm just losing the plot.
Yeah.
Or like you said earlier, it's like, I just feel really angry, really grumpy. And they don't necessarily know what it is, but they can feel that there's a difference. They feel on edge all the time. And I was talking to someone about the term high functioning anxiety in terms of people who appear confident and very competent, and they're definitely not those types of people to experience anxiety. Yes. We can all kind of use our sort of our stereotypes of these are the people who are anxious and therefore they're not quite strong enough to cope with what's going on in the world, and this over here who are really, they're the leaders and they're the people who are competent with everything. They don't experience it, but actually they can be feeling what's going on in their brain in terms of triggering the threat response is just as powerful for them, and it impacts on them just the same way, but they don't let it show, or they don't explain it, they're not open about it. And in that case, it affects their productivity, it affects their ability to engage well, but it's like an internal battle, which is exhausting.
They've all lots of people in modern organizations have done their profiling things in their teams, so they know there are those types who feel they are emotional, but I'm one of these types. We don't express our emotions, and brackets, we're better, actually, we're more thinkers. But actually, no matter how logical or left-brained or whatever other term you want to apply to it, it is normal in nature to have a brain be more alert because the situation potentially contains more risk. Is how we have evolved to be, we're such super successful species. So things are different in your brain, whether you are worrying or thinking about things differently or not. And how you code that, I think, is a really important conversation to have with yourself. You might feel a little bit different and not know exactly what that might mean, and might not be familiar with saying to yourself, I feel a bit anxious. And so it doesn't have to be called anxiety. You can say, I feel a bit more tense than I normally do, or I'm more tired than I normally am, or just, this is boring, this is frustrating, this is, all sorts of things might be going on. The point of understanding our emotional responses to the situation is that we need to acknowledge that it does affect our ability to communicate, and it affects our ability to make decisions, and it affects how we process information. So we're likely to be a lot less productive. We tend to narrow our focus down onto a very small number of things, rather than broaden out and be able to consider more options and be more innovative and do all the, pivoting and all of that. Actually, our brains are telling us to be more focused in our views. So it affects how we work.
Yeah, and I think actually that focusing down views, it's really interesting to see how some people respond to that. So some people will almost withdraw from the work, but they can't cope with the work, or they can't cope with, going the social aspects that we're now allowed to think differently about, or they can't cope with certain bits, and they're just going to focus on this to keep themselves feeling safe and to try and lower that kind of fear response. And other people who are often kind of more high achieving types of people are used almost as a way of driving themselves forward. So they kind of have that level of anxiety. It's like, well, I've got to do better, and I've got to do more, and I've got to do faster, and I've got to make sure I succeed. And for them, it's not so much about making them freeze with fear. It actually propels them kind of forward at high speed, but that's not sustainable. I mean, you end up seeing people almost having that kind of the symptoms of burnout, because they've got this internal stuff going on. Their brain is all over the place in terms of their amygdala firing and emotional being so high, and yet they're supposed to be the super confident, competent person in the workplace. And the two just don't go together, do they?
Lots of adrenaline, lots of testosterone, lots of cortisol. We should be able to fix this. We should be able to, make working from home even more productive than it was. All of that narrative. And we're also experiencing a lot of drama around us. I did a survey today which was all about what sort of things have you noticed as a result of the last couple of months. And one of the questions was about what is the impact of social media on you. And what I've noticed is a lot of judging and a lot of criticizing and a lot of drama, which is sort of fueling our more extreme emotional responses to the things that are going on, and victimizing some, demonizing others. That is all part of the drama pattern. But that is also very tiring and very unproductive in teams.
And I think once, like you were saying just now about the whole the impact of your emotional arousal on your ability to be productive and so on, and it's, people often forget that is their sort of emotional intelligence that really quickly is affected by high emotional arousal. So that ability to communicate well, that ability to empathize, to know what's going on with other people in your team. If you're struggling with the stuff going on for you and you're not acknowledging it and working out a way of kind of regulating it, then actually the ability to put yourself in the shoes of everyone else around you who are possibly in quite different states, emotional states, is even harder.
Yes. So working with organizations who've dealt with probably facing some kind of big change, what I've learned that's really helpful is all types in your team need to learn how to acknowledge and label, if you like, their own emotional responses, whether that is familiar and comfortable or not, and to build in the team your level of ability to express empathy for each other's emotional responses, whether you understand them or not. I get that for you, anxiety is very different from how it is for me. And although I think I'm calm, I do feel slightly more tense than usual. And I can see that you're definitely more animated than usual. So just to acknowledge that helps, because it means that our conversation can then be more informed. We know kind of where we are. And the next step is then to figure out, so how are we going to remain productive, given that this is the situation, this is how we're responding, what then do we need to pay attention to?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's putting emotional intelligence at the top of the agenda.
Yes. And that's the kind of conversation that I think you and I need to be having with teams and leaders to help them to navigate that very difficult territory that for most people is unfamiliar.
Yeah, exactly. Agreed, wholeheartedly, as usual.
Let's do it.
Thanks, Frances.
You too, Lisa.